Hey everybody, T.O. from Art Geek Teaching. Today we're going to look at pouring some epoxy on some image transfers. So the first thing I'm doing here is preparing some cradled panels, and I didn't really do anything to these other than open them up and took them out of the plastic, and now I'm applying a coat of gesso. I watered down the gesso just a little bit, use a foam brush. I want it fairly light on there, and I'm putting two fairly light coats on this rather than a heavy coat. And so after the gesso is dried, then the next step is sanding it really lightly. And I did put two coats of gesso, by the way. I just want to seal up as much of that wood as I can. You could also use a primer. If these were bigger panels, I wouldn't be using gesso. I'd be using paint and primer all in one kind of thing. After I sand them, then I'm just going to wipe them down, make sure they're clean and dry. There's nothing on my little paper towel there except for the paper towel itself. There's no alcohol or water or anything like that. It's just a raw paper towel wiping everything down. The next thing that I'm going to do here is a transfer. And there's a number of different ways that you can do this. You can use DAS product, you can use InkAid product, you can use alcohol, hand sanitizer. There's a number of different ways you can transfer. This particular transfer method here, I'm using InkAid, and I'm just putting it on fairly thickly. I want to tip it back and forth to make sure that there are no dry areas on the panel, and you can see that fairly easily if you just tip it a little bit in the light. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my transfer sheet and just roll it on there. Usually I would use a roller. These were a bunch of tests that I was doing, trying to actually just do tests with this proof of concept that I had. And so I didn't spend as much time in some areas as I normally would on a bigger project. But needless to say, a little roller here will work fine. If it were a bigger project, I would not use a foam roller probably. I would just use a regular paint roller, and it seems to work really, really well. You just don't want to scratch around on it because they're fairly sensitive, and you can scratch the emulsion off fairly easily. You can see here, I did not wait 3 minutes. I started pulling it up and it wasn't set, so I had to come back and come back in another minute or so and do it again. If you wait 3 minutes with InkAid and DAS products, you usually get a really, really clean transfer. And so I'm just pulling it back, rolling it very quickly and easily. Actually, not quickly, slowly and easily, and then you can see kind of the result of the transfer. Pretty decent transfer. All right, the ones that do not transfer, what I do is I go back with either watercolor or acrylic paint, and I put some, fill in the spaces, repaint some areas. Actually, watercolor works okay, but I believe that acrylic paint works substantially better. And while I'm there, I usually grab pen and ink and I make some marks. I just want to get more of my hand in there that is live, as opposed to just the hand that is from my digital transfer and original image. Okay, so the next step is I've prepped the tables and the area for pouring epoxy. And in this first clip here, I'm just going to mix my mica powders with a little bit of alcohol to make a paste. If I make a really thick paste, it tends to dissolve much better when I add it to the epoxy, and it doesn't leave the little streaks that you can sometimes get if your epoxy powder is not, or your mica powder is not entirely mixed into your epoxy. So making a small paste there seems to work really, really well. And I'm just going to go through, do it for every single color that I have. I'm not used to working this small. This is really, really a small amount of alcohol, mica powder, and in fact epoxy. Okay, and finally what I'm going to do is go ahead and pour some epoxy out onto each of my panels, and for this method I would be using 3 to 4 ounces per square foot. I'm using a little bit more than that because I had some epoxy that I actually needed to get rid of. You can see already that it has yellowed. These tests, I wanted to warm them up anyway, and I didn't really worry too much about the amber already there. So this is some older epoxy that it's not really UV stable if you don't take care of it. And so anyway, I was okay with the amber color of it, and it is also not the regular art epoxy that I would use on these. This is actually a deep pour epoxy, and so it does have a little bit more of a amber tint than normally. So I poured it on, and I like to, on pieces like this that are sensitive, I would spread it out with my hands rather than a trowel. Usually a 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch square notch trowel, or depending on what size panel you're working on, works really well. But if I'm doing a transfer, my fingers works a lot better because I don't have to worry about scratching my surface beneath it. So just going through, making sure that the surface tension is broken on all these panels, and then after I do that first break of surface tension, then I will go ahead and just really start playing with the micas, and that's all I'm going to do is pour some micas on there. I'll use some alcohol and move things around, but that's really it. I'll just let this play. Top view would be much better. You can see what's happening, but I'm not at the home studio here. I'm at school. If you're new to epoxy, you can see here that I've blasted it with my torch to get some of the bubbles, the initial bubbles off. And I usually use stone coat countertop, and I only torch that 2 times, usually only 2 times, sometimes 3, but I don't want it overworked with the torch. I don't want to heat it up. That can cause some waves and different things. So I torch it early on, get the bubbles out, and then I'll torch it again towards the middle of my session, and maybe one more time towards the end of the session, unless that session happens to be really, really long. Once it starts to cure up, I don't want to be on there with the torch. But here I am just adding a little bit of mica with alcohol, and you can move that mica and alcohol that's mixed with your resin. You could just move that around with a heat gun. Anyway, just move it around with a little bit of air. Real short piece here on just give it a quick sand each piece. Okay, so moving on here, the next step is to mix our ultimate top coat. This is a 2-part to 1-part mixture, and it's actually really difficult to do it, I think, in really small bundles like this. I was only mixing 3 ounces, and so it does work to do a little bit more than that. Works better, I should say. But gonna just mix that up 2 to 3 minutes, and I actually mixed the part A a little bit longer first and then moved on. So the next thing we're going to do is take my rollers, 1/4 inch short nap rollers, and I'm just going to run them against some tape and take any of the fuzz off that might be on the rollers. Easy, very quick. And I do both rollers. You'll see in a minute here I have 2 rollers, one for wet and one for dry. The best method to do this is not how I'm doing it here. I'm only doing this because I just have 3 ounces of product. It really works much better to put the product in a small paint tray, roller tray, and immerse your roller in it. Here I'm just showing you the 1 roller for wet, 1 roller for dry. Okay, so it's going to take just a minute to get the roller saturated, and which is what you really want to do. You want to saturate that roller completely and then move on to rolling it out. Finally got it saturated, finally got it moving. And again, this is not best practice. It's much better just to immerse that thing in your paint tray and then pull it out and start rolling. I'm just going to make sure that everything is covered here. I'm just going to roll through here and do each piece. Then I'm going to come back and dry roll them. Okay, so here we go, dry rolling. Just going to take as much of the excess product out that we can. A very light touch on the roller. I'm putting no pressure on it at all. It's just the weight of the roller itself. And I'm just going to go through and pull off as much excess as it'll actually pick up. And that's it. Pull the tape off, paint the edges, and they're done.